Hi, everybody. I'm Angie Weber, one of the co founders of the Divorce Support Collective, where we are on a mission to reimagine the process of divorce through collaboration and support from contemplation all the way through thriving post decree. And I am so excited to have Kirstina Quast with me today in order to answer some of your biggest co parenting questions. So, Kirstina is a mental health professional, mediator, coach, and consultant. She's also a mother, a stepmother, and an adoptive mother of 5 children. So, you've got a lot of stuff going on. So I'm so excited that you're able to join us today. And you've lived through the experience of navigating both the positive and negative aspects of co parenting and blended family dynamics. And this really fuels your passion for empowering people as they navigate some of the most challenging moments in their life. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today and answering some of our community questions.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, well, we can just start diving into the questions because, like I said, there's a lot of them when it comes to co parenting and just navigating the divorce process. And I know that you are not actively a parent consultant. However, that is something you're very experienced in. So I would love to start there and for you to share exactly what a parent consultant is and when they get brought into the process.
Sure. So to summarize, a parenting consultant is also sometimes called a parenting coordinator, and they have a pretty specific way in which they come about. Both parents have to come to an agreement to utilize a parenting consultant, and parents create a legally binding agreement that gets filed actually with the court. So it's a pretty specific process to initiate that. Oftentimes, an attorney may be involved in helping to draft that and kind of create that agreement. The intention of a parenting consultant is to help play a neutral role in resolving conflict or discrepancies or helping two parents to kind of manage ongoing concerns. So sometimes these are used in post-decree situations. Sometimes they're used when kids have aged. And so maybe what was initially determined is no longer relevant. Developmental needs have changed. Sometimes they're used in a divorce process because there maybe are some extra challenging layers that there isn't a one size fits all approach to. So, for example, it's common to maybe use a parenting consultant if children have some sort of special needs that need special accommodations on an ongoing basis. And parents maybe need that extra neutral person to help navigate that. Maybe there are kind of developing activities, and that can be complicated with schedules. And so maybe schedules need to be adapted as kids go through different kind of activities and things that they're involved with in school and so forth. Or maybe people are moving to different communities and there's just a lot of ongoing changes that a one-time decision from a judge doesn't always address. So oftentimes what a parenting consultant has extra training as a mental health professional or oftentimes as an attorney. So they have a background with parenting consulting training and ongoing required training that they're expected to do each year to maintain that, to be on the Rule 114 roster as a neutral, as well as typically experience working with families in some capacity. So you get to elect, or together with your co-parent, you choose and select your parenting consultant that you want to use. And then their role really is multifaceted. So they often help with general problem solving, coaching, if you will, and somewhat, some people look at it as mediating. And so maybe facilitating ongoing conversations between you and your co-parent so that hopefully you can generate some of your own decisions. One of the big pieces of a parenting consultant is that ultimately, if parents are not able to come up with their own decisions, they do have, excuse me, they do have the authority to make decisions in the case when parents cannot, so long as it is outlined within the scope of the PC agreement that was created initially. Uh, so sometimes that is needed, and sometimes that is helpful for families to have that neutral outside person kind of be able to make a final decision if things are just not able to get there. And usually their appointment is time limited, maybe 18 months, 2 years. And the hope is that parents have developed greater skills and families have kind of found their kind of healthy way to navigate parenting. Uh, they can be renewed by the agreement of the parties, but they cannot be court ordered.
Mm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about that because I think when you go into a divorce, especially when you have children, there's so many things getting thrown at you and you're not really sure which way to look. And so sometimes the different terminology and options can be a little confusing, but I think you gave a great definition of what a parent consultant or coordinator is and why they would want to be brought in. But now let's get to some specific co-parenting questions that a lot of our community has right now. One of them is how do you move forward when the other parent keeps bailing on parenting time? How do you handle this and how can they best support their children when this happens?
Yes, this is a very good question, and I think very specific to individual scenarios, individual circumstances. So, depending on the ages and stages of kids, uh, you might take a different approach. So, for example, a younger child may not understand calendars and schedules and times and things like that. So, you might approach it differently than, let's say, an older child who understands that maybe that parent is supposed to arrive, every Friday at 4, and they know how to tell time and it's Friday at 4, and where are they? So I think one thing to know is that we have to tailor our approach to our specific children. And you may have a sibling group of more than one child. And so, what maybe a younger child, what's appropriate for them may be different than an older sibling. So, that can get really tricky too. And what siblings share with each other can get tricky. But I think one really top thing to keep in mind is that as a parent, we never want to speak negatively about the other parent. So trying to really regulate our own emotions and our own opinions about what might be going on, and really trying to create kind of a neutral uh, experience or kind of a neutral mood for our kids. Uh, and we don't want to make false promises. We don't want to lie to our children, but we also don't want to overshare with our children. So that's where it gets very complicated, right? Like there's adult information, there's adult emotions, and we're trying to allow our children kind of create space that our children can share with us what their questions are or what their emotions are without us necessarily sharing what ours are. Um, and so I think oftentimes, if we don't know the answer, if we don't know why that other parent didn't show up, I think that's fair to say to our kids, I'm not sure, and I'm here for you. So really giving like validating comments to our kids, like I'm here for you, and I'm happy to talk through this with you. Uh, would you like to talk about this? Do you have any questions? I may not have the answers to your questions, but I'm here to listen. And I think letting kids know and giving ourselves permission to know that we don't have to answer all of the questions. We just have to validate the fact that they may have questions. If at some point we can kind of grow into a place with our co-parent where we can address this mutually, that becomes, I think, a different kind of approach or kind of a different kind of conversation. But I think when we're left to kind of help our kids navigate this scenario, the biggest thing is the validation, the empathy, and really managing our own emotions, our own opinions, and relying on our support network to process that independently away from our kids. And knowing that no matter what, we do not want to speak negatively or give kind of that negative tone about our co-parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we talked a lot about at the co-parenting success seminar that we held about how, because kids can start internalizing that, right? Because they say, well, one parent says the other parent's all awful, and the other parent says the other one's all awful, and I made up of both of them. So I must be awful too because there's nothing good on either side. And so I think that's a great recommendation. And I loved how you said you didn't need to know the answers right away because as parents, sometimes we think we should know all the answers or we're expected to. And it's perfectly fine not to know them and to even tell your children, like, you know what, I'm not sure. I need some time to think about that and then come back to it later as well. And then, of course, with the emotional regulation, that's a huge, huge piece of just life in general, but can be very beneficial in the co-parenting journey. Now, another
You know, and
question from, oh yeah.
I was going to add to that. Sometimes we may think we know the answer. We may have a pretty good idea maybe what that other co-parent is doing instead of picking up their children, or maybe they did send a text or, did inform us of something. And I think sometimes we have to be very cautious about how much of that we may share with our kids, especially with their developmental ages and stages. And reassuring our children, you know what? I love you so much. I am here for you. It looks as though maybe this other parent wasn't able to make it today.
Yeah.
Some kind of very neutral statement that does not hold that negative tone, and also doesn't kind of deliver the message to the kids that like, oh, something else is more important than you. We do not want to give them that impression whatsoever. We don't want to lead them to believe that, that other parent maybe chose a different activity over them or anything of that nature, even if we have reason to believe that, we might think we know what they're doing instead of picking up their children.
Yeah. And as a co-parent coach, as you are, and consultant, if this is a continuing behavior by the other parent and we continuously see our children get let down because the parent is not coming to pick them up or they keep bailing, would you just suggest to start putting up some boundaries and not actually sharing with the kids when they're supposed to be picked up until you have confirmation?
That's a good question too. And I think there's a few layers to that. So, again, part of it being developmental. So if a child is not aware of, dates and times and schedules, I think it can be appropriate, age appropriate, to limit how much a child is told in advance. If a child is more aware of that routine or what is supposed to be happening, I think that there can be some conversations maybe in advance to say, we do have a schedule, but I'll let you know in advance, maybe whether it's a day in advance or the morning of, or kind of depending on how your schedule is arranged. I'll let you know when it's confirmed. So we have a tentative schedule that they're aware of. And then I can let you know if it's confirmed. That can sometimes ease kids' anxiety a little bit. Uh, Depending on the pattern. And when you talk about boundaries related to this, that can get a little tricky because if there is a court-ordered parenting schedule, in we're bound to follow that.
Mhm.
And so sometimes different approaches can be taken if a schedule needs to be revisited. Perhaps that is something that needs to be kind of revisited with the assistance of a mediator, sometimes with the assistance of attorneys, in a way that says, if this schedule is just not working for whatever variety of reasons, maybe we need to have kind of a joint conversation to say, how can we restructure this? And that can be kind of a form of sort of reestablishing boundaries and approaching that co-parent in a way that we try to refrain from any sort of shame and blame to
Mhm.
say, let's go back to the drawing board or let's try to find something that will work better, so that it can be done consistently.
Awesome. Okay, so let's say we're not actually in the co-parenting stage necessarily yet because they haven't told their children that they are getting a divorce, but they have made the decision that that is the path we're going to take. How do you figure out the best time to tell your children, and what are some key things you want to make sure you talk to them about?
Yes. So this is a challenging area and one that doesn't have, again, a one size fits all approach. One thing that can be really powerful is if you and your co-parent are able to work together to create what's referred to as like a we statement, so that kids are getting the message that this was a mutual decision and that you're working together for their benefit. So a we statement is often, I think, effectively done with the help of a neutral, with whether that be sometimes like a child specific mediator, somebody who has a lot of experience in that area. Sometimes people do use their own personal therapist, or if a couple has been working with a marriage therapist or a family therapist in any way, some professional that may help give them insight that knows the specific details of their family, of their children, to kind of help guide them in how to create and deliver that we statement. One thing I think about too is the language that we use. So again, using the word we versus you know, your mom or your dad is leaving.
Mm.
That's kind of has this underlying tone of blame, and trying to stay away from that right from the discussion is helpful. Another thing that I think commonly people will say to kids is, it's not your fault. We've decided to maybe separate, but it's not your fault. And I think that's a well-intended statement. However, we introduce the language of fault.
Mm.
And so I think we have to be really careful about that, because to some kids, our brains will naturally go to like, okay, well, if it's not my fault, then whose fault is it?
Mm.
And so I think kind of really helping shape our language and being very cautious about the language that we use uh, is helpful. Um,
Yeah, I think those are great tips. And again, every family is going to be unique and different and have different goals and challenges. And we also know that every child is different and they may need a little bit of different support in this transition moving forward. So I think those were great tips. Okay, last question that I hear from clients sometimes, and I think this is sometimes a struggle with co-parents, especially if maybe they're not on the same page, is my co-parent refuses to allow things from my house over there and they won't send anything from theirs to mine. How do I deal with this?
mhm. Yeah, so my sort of follow-up question to that, in that scenario would be, what is the value of those items? And I don't mean monetary value, but what is the emotional value to the children of those items? So for example, if it's a favorite blanket or a favorite stuffed animal or kind of a security-based item, I think that would be looked at in one way. And potentially, if it is a security-based item, trying to get creative with your child to say, okay, how can we assure that you have a security-based item in both homes and that you don't have to bring it back and forth? But maybe you have that certain special blanket that was purchased in your dad's home and a certain special blanket purchased in your mom's home, and then you don't have to worry about forgetting it. If it is sometimes what I think of as a favorite item, like maybe kids have a favorite pair of shoes. Like I have plenty of shoes at both homes, but these are just my favorite ones and I like them and I want to wear them all the time. Um, that I think can be navigated maybe slightly differently, and depending on your communication level with the co-parent, sometimes there's enough effective communication in place where there can be some discussion between co-parents to say, hey, I know you have plenty of shoes at your house, but they're just really loving these shoes this at this point. They're new, they're their new school shoes. Do you mind if they bring them back and forth? Um, if they are required items, so sometimes I think more along the lines of like school stuff, a backpack, a particular backpack, items that need to kind of go with kids to and from school or to and from activities. Sometimes I do see this maybe with sporting events, like, no, you don't need those particular basketball practice clothes. I have practice clothes here for you. And so some of those are, I would put maybe in the more required category. Things that kids can have duplicates of can be an effective way to kind of just minimize the conflict going back and forth. Um, However, if kids want that sense of like, these are my items and they come with me wherever I go, I think reassuring kids that if the communication is possible with that co-parent, that you will do what you can to kind of reach out and connect with the co-parent yourself so that they don't feel in the middle. We don't want our kids to feel like the messengers, or that they have to somehow kind of relay information. We also don't want kids to kind of get into this pattern of What I've seen some kids do, like kind of sneaking stuff back and forth. They kind of tuck it in their backpack and don't say anything. Um, and we want to refrain from that or prevent that as much as possible. So really trying to be open with our kids to say, if there's something special or something meaningful to you, let me know and I'll see what I can do. And if we don't have that level of communication at this time with that co-parent, where we can't maybe seek that resolution, we'll do what we can to make sure you have double, that you don't have to pick and choose, but you can just have one in each location.
Mhm.
Um, so I think those are good starting points. I know there can still be plenty of stuck points with these things, but always remembering that, again, it kind of goes back to language. I often hear kids say, well, these are my mom's clothes or these are my dad's clothes.
Mm,
And I will, sometimes kind of I notice it and I think, well, they're your clothes.
mm.
Um, you know, you're not the kids are not literally wearing their mother's or their father's clothes. They're wearing their
Yeah.
clothes. It's just a matter of like whose house they keep those clothes at or which
Yeah.
parent maybe bought those clothes. So just paying really close attention to the language we use. So if it's like, no, you can't wear those clothes back to your other parent's house. Those are my clothes. Like making sure kids feel empowered to know that like these are your things. And and it, we teach our kids to respect their things and honor their you know things and so forth. So
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for answering these questions today. Again, I'm sure there are many more that our community has, and your information will be in the notes so that they can contact you. But Kirstina, thank you so much for hanging out with me, answering some of these questions, and helping empower the co-parenting journey. For those listeners, if you would like to learn more about the Divorce Support Collective and other future events we have coming up for the community, please make sure to subscribe to our email list, and you will be caught up on all the upcoming events. But thank you so much for joining me again, Kirstina. And I
thank you for
hope that,
having me.
yes, yes. And I know that this helped our community members for sure. So thanks so much.